Welcome, everyone, to episode 41 of Headlines and History with Jon Molik. Here we are, our second episode after our little break. And as I had said last episode, we're going to continue to talk about Israel. And in this episode, though, we're going to talk about something that is just not what I really hoped to ever have an episode about. The problem is everyone keeps asking me about it. I sound like Donald Trump there. Everyone keeps asking me. But nonetheless, I do get a lot of questions, particularly in the social media sphere, about my opinions on the overall issue between Israel and Palestine, if that's what you would like to call it, the Palestinians, the Israelis and the Palestinians. And I've been reluctant to do an episode on this topic, this very weighty, large, grand topic, for a few different reasons, but most importantly, because it's not for me to really do. I'm not a scholar. I'm not a historian. I don't bring any particular knowledge base or, opinion with deep validity to this conversation. And there's so many opinions. There are so many people out there that dedicate their life to dealing with this concept, to dealing with this problem, that, where am I to fit in, and where's my worth even in this? But, I obviously I have some military experience. Obviously I have some foreign affairs and military conflict experience, in the sense that I've been in the military now for almost 30 years and I've deployed to these environments. I've been to Israel. And so I certainly have an experience and a value above and beyond, say, just a random person on the street. But I'm well aware that I don't fit into the experts in any sense. And so I've always been at a distance. I've always kept myself at a distance. However, I certainly do have opinions, in particular when it comes to the specific actions that are happening today. What's happening after October 7th? Why Hamas was involved in the way that they were? Why did they conduct the attack? How does it relate to the rest of the Middle East and the rest of the conflicts that are there? All of the things that we talk about on the show. And so when I provide opinions or provide context on social media, or I have conversations, small conversations in and around work or whatever, people tend to ask my opinion, and I give them the same answer that I'm providing you with now, which is, listen, it's not really for me to say. I'll just give you my opinion based on the little bit of experience and the little bit of knowledge that I have. But I guess if you ask, I'll provide it. And that's what this episode, maybe even two episodes, it depends on how long we go here. That's what this episode is going to be about. I'm gonna go through and just give you some opinions and context as I see it, through the experience that I have and what I've done. So the main takeaway before I begin here is to remind everybody I'm certainly not coming to this conversation with the belief or the knowledge that I am the know-it-all, the one that has the answers. And just a couple of conversations here and we can solve this conflict. That's certainly not the case. However, I do certainly have some opinions and certain ways that I see things. I've read arguments, many books. Again, I've been to Israel, and I'll provide what I can. What I think we'll do is I'm going to go through a list of topics, basically, and some of them are going to be foundational in the sense we could discuss the broader discussion about Israel and Palestine's existence in themselves, down to some of the events that occurred on October 7th, around October 7th, or why certain things are happening. And so really it's going to be almost a list of what are some of the claims people are making online or in articles or within books. And, I'll make the claim and then provide some context and maybe some arguments on both sides, just to give you an opportunity to think a little bit about where both sides are coming from, and maybe help you in your own journey have an opinion on what you think is happening here, and what it is you think maybe you support, if you do tend to support one view, if you will, over the other view. Okay. Episode caveat: although I remain in the business, all of my opinions here are my own. This is one that is particularly important for me to remind everyone. This is just how I see things as a human being, and has nothing to do with, let me say, as a potentially biased Western, a middle class male in America view of what's happening overseas in this particular issue, and certainly has nothing to do with the military or the DoD or anything else. As a reminder, the United States is an official ally with the state of Israel, and they are a partner, and they are a friend, and they are. It doesn't get any more clear. They are an ally. We sell them weapons. We provide them humanitarian aid. We have official relationships within the Department of Defense, particularly in New York, as I've said before. And when I did travel to Israel, as I said last episode, I traveled because of that official relationship. And so, for those that are going to be looking at this episode with the potential to find, maybe an evenly balanced conversation, I'm going to do everything that I can to do that. I really do work hard, and genuinely work hard, to see multiple sides of view in any conflict. It is true, I'm going to have some subconscious bias, in the sense that, I've worked with the Israeli military, and I've spent time there, and even though I will work hard, and I do work hard to keep my mind open to all possibilities and all opinions, it's just impossible to alleviate all bias. And it happens on everyone's side. It's a whole part of history, the study of history, historiography. It's all about doing the best you can to eliminate the bias that you either know you have or you don't have. But just understand, as somebody who studies history and looks at history, I'm well aware that there's biases that I likely have, and I don't even know it. Okay. But nonetheless, I'm going to do everything I can to make it as, again, balanced and fair as I can. So why don't we, we'll go with the first, to me, the first most important, foundational, oldest argument, and that is in terms of the greater context, meaning the deep argument about the existence of Israel at all, and that is the claim that the Israelis were there first. Biblically, it would be the Israelites, that they were there, quote, first, and therefore they deserve to be there. And if there's any argument to be made that cannot be challenged with any equal weight, would be, I was there first. And while that, if you're a supporter of the country of Israel, there certainly is weight there. And it seems logical that if you want to go all the way back to the beginning, because there's so much back and forth throughout the last couple hundred years, nonetheless, in particular, since Zionism started in the late 1800s, but, officially in 48. But if you have a challenge going, but, then go all the way back to the beginning, and the Israelis get the claim, the Jewish people get the claim, we were here first. The problem with that is, and I hope it seems relatively obvious, is that isn't how the world works. And you can't make that claim. You can't make that claim and have it be considered inarguable if you also support other nations, other peoples that live in a specific land that weren't there first. That's just plain hypocritical. Now, yes, every scenario, every history is different, and we can get into all the nuances about why something certain happened, why certain peoples ended up in different places, and it's all because this person invaded that person. And there's nuance to all of it. got it. But if you're going to use the simplistic argument of I was there first and then support somebody who wasn't in another land, that doesn't make sense. It doesn't work logically. And a lot of Americans fall into this trap because they feel, well, America has a right to be Americans, white Europeans, where we came from. We have the right to be where we are in the United States. And Native Americans, the indigenous people, they live on reservations in the United States. While they have the right to live wherever they want, they do have the freedom and the ability to live on reservations that quote-unquote white North European Americans do not have the right to live. If you make the claim that Israel has the right to be there first, but you also as an American have a right to be here on Native American land, it doesn't work. It doesn't work in Australia. It doesn't work in Canada. It doesn't work anywhere else. And there's a whole bunch of possibilities and examples throughout history. I'll just use the one that's going to be most interesting to our listeners here, mainly because they're American. So if you are not willing to, you as a listener are not willing to give up the house in which you live today because you bought it with your money and your grandfather owned it and your great-grandfather owned it, but a Native American tribe comes to your house, the Mohawks here in upstate New York as an example, they show up to the house and they say, hey, we've passed some new laws, some things have changed, we're going to get back some of the land that you stole from us centuries ago. We were here first. And so I'm going to need you to give up the house. And when you say no, they force you out. Now you're mad. You have a problem. And you're going to say, yeah, but we lived here for so long. I've been here for centuries. My great-great-great-grandfather built this house in 1771. And we've built roots here. And how, my second cousins and third cousins all live on this same farm and blah, 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 all of these discussions. And you're going to say, that's just not fair. Who cares what happened 2,000 years ago? Who cares what happened with these Native American tribes in 1412? That's not relevant anymore. What's relevant is what's happening now. Okay, how can you logically make that argument and then make the opposite argument in Israel? You can't. Because that's exactly what happened with the Palestinian argument when the Israelites left and then eventually returned to the land, if you will, in the late 1800s and started making the claim, this is our land. We were here first. Now, to attempt to have a conversation about some of that nuance, yes, what the counter argument is that makes the conversation about Israel a bit different is the diaspora, the Jewish diaspora for years was basically chased around the world, if you will, at least Europe, because everyone hated them in a sense, and they were not allowed, if you will, to remain in the land. They were forced out and then just came back to claim the land that was originally theirs. That's what makes the nuance, or that's the nuance that makes this one a little bit different. That's not the same thing as what happened with what happened in the United States, what happened in America. So it is slightly different, but ultimately the conversation is, and the argument is, we were here first, we being the Israelis were here first, and so therefore we deserve to be here. My whole point in saying this and is simply to say it's not a strong argument. It's not one that I feel is valid to end the game, to end the conversation. There is too much that has happened throughout centuries, even millennia in this part of the world, for everyone to just pack up and make a decision to say, well, we were here first, and so therefore we belong here. Because these same arguments happen in Asia. They have to. Are we going to give everything back to the Mongols? I mean, they forced other people out through literally genocide, and people came back. And so what are we going to do? Sit back down at a table and have some UN council and then have a discussion as to, okay, who literally was here first, who was pushed out, who wasn't pushed out, and then rearrange the world so we can all have the right place to be? It's nonsensical. It'll never happen. But in the Israel-Palestine conversation, it's the one that always comes up or often comes up. Yeah, but this scenario is unique. We were here first. Now, this relates also, this nuance is also tied in to the religious aspect, which is a whole nother discussion and another point that I want to make here in this list of things that we're going to talk about, at least in the first part of this episode. And that is, don't trust someone who tells you that religion plays no role in the Israel-Palestine conflict. It's just not true. That might seem obvious. There's the temple, there's Jerusalem, there's all the history tied in. There's the fact that Palestinians happen to be Muslims. And again, I'll keep using the word Palestinian. That's the word that everybody uses. So let's just use that one for the sake of argument. And the Israelis are generally Jewish, even though not everyone who lives in Israel is Jewish. The 2 million Arabs live there. There are Christians. It's a whole thing. We all know this. But generally speaking, particularly the fight over Jerusalem is based on religion. Now, yes, it is true when you look at when historians dig into this, when social historians dig into this, it is true you can identify a whole list of other reasons why peoples, to include the Israelis and Palestinians, argue about the right to live in the land in which they want. That has nothing to do with religion. And there are plenty of people that have similar arguments and fight with the similar ferocity that have no religious aspect. And so people will argue, well, just because this conflict seems unsolvable and it's been going on for so long doesn't mean that it's actually based in religion, because there are plenty of other people that have this same fierce backlash to others moving into their land. And it has nothing to do with religion whatsoever. So religion, you can tease religion out and the conflict would still exist. I don't think that's the case in this instance in particular. It is true. Nationalism plays a role. Racism plays a role. Economics play a role. Yes, all of those things, language, cultural history, all of these things, relationships, national relationships with world powers, right? Israel still stands because of its relationship with the United States, in particular, its military relationship. That's a claim. Sure, all of those things are relevant. They all play a role. But again, Jerusalem in particular, it is solely a religious claim that Jerusalem is important. Yes, it's important because it's been important for a long time. Yes, so there's a historical aspect, but that piece of property is desirous to particularly the Israelis because it happens to be the location that they believed God actually existed on earth. When Zionism became a popular discussion in the late 1800s, in the early 1900s, and really started to gain traction with Herzl and others, there were discussions internationally. Particularly, there were some with the League of Nations before Israel was founded in 1948, after World War II, that another land would be given to the Israelis, to the Jewish people, because the Palestinian people, the Arab Palestinians, have been living in the land of Palestine for so many centuries now, it would just cause conflict. And everybody knew that. Maybe it was unfair that the Jewish people were forcibly removed from the edge of the Mediterranean years ago. But to fix that wrong then would have been disastrous. And so they said, well, what about going over here? If this is really just about protection, this is really just about being safe, this is about being able to ensure you have a place to live in which other people cannot attack you, then just go here. And now that it just escapes me, I should have wrote it down in my notes. It escapes me exactly what some of the other options were. Some of the more historically minded listeners may remember. But nonetheless, it's not really the point. The point is it wasn't Palestine. because there was no other place in the world where God literally resided. Now, I've said this in previous episodes. I'll remind everyone, the major difference for those that understand the Christian and Muslim religious viewpoints and may have more experience there, it is completely the opposite from the Jewish view of God and the connection to God. Both Christians and Muslims believe that there is an effort to be made to spend eternity with God, Allah, however you view him, with the works that you do. It can be either through grace or works or whatever you believe, but nonetheless, it's all about what you do here as a human, and then eventually you'll make it up to heaven to spend eternity with God. Again, either through your good works or through the grace, either one. The Jewish people believe the opposite. They believe that their job was to create the perfect location on earth that they could then live among. They could use to live among God. And if there wasn't a good enough place on earth, there was no connection to God. And so the Jews had to either act better and create a space that God could occupy. And for a long time, that was the Holy of Holies, a very small chamber within the temple that was built in Jerusalem. Destroyed twice. We've talked about that history. But without the temple, there is no connection to God. And that's why you see all of the people that go to the Western Wall and pray and leave the notes in the cracks and all the things they do, because that's as close as the Jewish people, the religious Jewish people, think they can be to God without there being a temple, is the last part of the Western Wall, the Western foundation of the temple. It's not even the temple, it's the foundation on which the temple sat. And so, if there's no temple, there is no God, at least no connection to God, no interaction with God in the way that the Jews believe they should have. And so that doesn't happen. And then the only way, so to look at this logically, if flip it on, the only way to have that is to have a temple. And it has to be in Jerusalem because that's where it was built. That's where David and on and on. That's where it has to be. You can't build that thing in North Africa. You can't build it in New York State. It's not going to work. And so religion plays the role. It's the belief in God, in the afterlife, and all of the things that come together with that make this particular land that important. If we could just move a Jewish state for the Jewish people into central Georgia, then one would argue we wouldn't be having this issue. Okay? I'll say again, yes, it is true that we can have fierce, deadly conflict between peoples over a specific plot of land that literally has nothing to do with any supernatural belief whatsoever. But that is not the case here. And that's not even to add into what the Christian desires are. And that's another good example of for those that believe that that it isn't religion per se that forces the violent conflict between both sides, because we often talk about the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians, and really it's about Jews and Muslims from a religious standpoint. But the Christians have a claim to Jerusalem as well. Now, there's a unique relationship there because really Christians were Jews first, and Jesus was a Jew, and so it isn't really its own independent third religion. It's an outcrop, if you will, in a lot of ways to Judaism. Again, and I'm speaking from a secular standpoint here. I'm not speaking from a Christian religious standpoint. Who there are people out there that would claim I was just blasphemous, but from a secular standpoint, and the Christians are not often argued as or not involved in the argument about whether they're going to kill someone or not kill someone or blow somebody up or whatever over particular land within Jerusalem. It's not as important to the Christians as it is to Jews and Muslims. And it is true that the Christians are not as involved in your newsreel like information that you have access to over the back and forth over Israel. It is true. There's almost like a concept that they're a third party that's just kind of among everyone else, and they kind of watch what's happening. But there's a very, very important connection, the Via della Rosa, that is there. I mean, I was in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. I mean, they're in touched the stone that Christians believe, many Christians, not all Christians, but a lot of Christians believe was the actual stone Christ's cross was on when he was crucified at the end of his life. And so what more, and then within there is potentially the tomb or the cave rather that Jesus supposedly was laid in for 3 days before he rose and stuff. That's all right there in Jerusalem. And so, I mean, there is no more important location for Christians, right? So it's just as important to them. But my point is to say, why are they different? Because from a religious aspect, again, Jews need the land in order to be close to God. Christians don't need that as much. And so there is this religious element to their connection, but it's less to the land and more to the relationship. If like Jesus said, for example, potentially said, depending on what you believe within the Bible, that he is the new temple. And then therefore, for the whole purpose, you don't need a temple. I am the next temple. And as long as you know me, then you can know God and you can know so that's that transition from, Christians don't necessarily need to have direct access to Jerusalem. It's nice and it's cool, and the potentially the cross was there, and it's all, the relics are important and all these things. But you don't lose your Christianity is ultimately what I'm trying to say. You don't lose your Christianity if you lose access to Jerusalem. That isn't necessarily the case for Jews. You really lose that connection to God if you don't have the temple. And they've been striving to return and build that temple, rebuild that temple rather, and so God can return to earth. And then there's all this prophetic stuff and all these things that will happen. And, if you're a Christian, it's in Revelation, and there's, whatever. All of these things potentially can happen. And again, you have the connection with the Muslims who believe that, Jerusalem is the third most important city in all of Islam behind Mecca, Medina, because there was the night when Muhammad, in a dream, but maybe actually flew to Jerusalem and then to the site of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which sits on top of the Temple Mount, and he then rode on a winged horse up to heaven and spent an evening, a day, whatever, with Abraham and Jesus, and so all the prophets were together, and then he returned and went back to Arabia. So there's that physical connection. It's not as important as Mecca, if you were to put them on a list of priorities, but important nonetheless. So when it comes to religion, you have to really challenge yourself to challenge others, I should say, that want to have a discussion with you about what's happening in Israel-Palestine, and whether it has any connection to religion whatsoever, because it does. Okay. Those are the first 2 points. Like I said, we're going to be cutting this down to about 30 minutes per episode to get that out there and make it work for my schedule better. So those are first 2 points. It took a little longer than I actually thought, but which is pretty good. I think we're kind of getting into this. I have plenty more, and so we'll break this out into at least 2, potentially maybe even 3 episodes. And what I want to do, though, I want if I'm missing something that you think is important in a certain point, maybe you don't think the point is all that relevant and I'm making it more important or more relevant than it should be, just reach out, shoot me an email, hit me up on social media, on YouTube, or I'm on Blue Sky now at Headlines in History. I'm on X still at Headlines in History, or Intel Chief on X. And just shoot me a message or shoot me an email, like from headlinesinhistory.com, which we're still up and running. And I can imagine we may have some back and forth, given the depth and the importance of this discussion. So join me next week, or next episode, I should say, and we'll continue on with our conversation about the whole thing, Israel-Palestine, and we'll get into conversations about what happened on the 7th. We're going to talk about genocide. We're going to talk about morality and ethics, and just all those really simple, deep world-ending, world-revolving scenarios and issues. So, thanks for joining me this week here, episode 41, and we'll check everybody next episode 42. Thanks again, Jon Molik, Headlines in History.